lines within all religious and at all levels of education. And that's kind of a dismaying fact, but it is true that abuse happens. The only real spikes I see that I've done in my research is among the some Indian societies, and not American, Indian in India societies, where they believe in open ability to have open sexual relationship with children, and 6% of young women coming out of those homes, that's 76% coming out of those homes, when questioned on a survey and asked if they were sexually abused as children, said that they were. So that's just that's a societal type thing that is being allowed to happen. About 30% of abused and neglected children will later abuse their own children, continuing this horrible cycle of abuse. This is a terrible thing, and this was why it shouldn't happen. It's being perpetuated from generation to generation. Abused children are 25% more likely to experience teen pregnancy. And this is another thing with regard to preventing abortions. If your children are being abused, the chances of them becoming pregnant as a teen or having a girlfriend pregnant as a teen is 25% more likely. These are some really depressing statistics, but I'm going to go on with them. 1/3 to 2/3 of child maltreatment causes involve substance abuse to some degree. That means parents in the home who are abusing substances and that are abusing their children because of that. And I've heard horrible stories from friends and relatives and stories I've heard in the news and online where people have said, talked about the neglect and the abuse that they received at the hands of their parents while they were drunk or high. And if you're drunk or high, you need to get your children into foster care and get them out of your home, because you are, first of all, a very bad example to them, number one. And number two, you are going to end up hurting these children. And I don't think any parent would want to do that. And I think you need to do the honorable thing. If you're an alcoholic out there or a drug abuser and you have children, you need to get those children out of that environment. And speaking to grandparents and great-grandparents, if you're seeing this, you need to say something. And I know some of you grandparents and parents have said things, but you also need to, if that child is in danger, you need to take it to the next level. Invite the child into your own home and take care of the child yourself. There are countless stories I know of grandmothers and grandparents raising their grandchildren because their parents can't maintain a normal and healthy lifestyle free from drug abuse. So this is something else. I know it's very controversial, and I know it hits home to a lot of people. And it's something I think that you should consider, and it should be taken seriously. 14% of all men in prison and 36% of all women in prison in the U.S. were abused as children, about twice the frequency seen in the general population. So we're seeing twice the number of people who are abused in the prison systems today. And if you've seen any of these shows about prison life and that type of thing, when child molesters go to prison, they are marked. They have to be kept in segregation. Otherwise, they will be harmed or killed by the other inmates because of their despising of child abuse. And some of them were abused themselves. Children who experience child abuse and neglect, are about 9 times more likely to be involved in criminal activity. Again, let's get back to this neglect thing. If you're allowing video games, the TV, the internet, laptops, computers, tablets to raise your children, so you don't have to have any interaction with them, and they don't bother you in your little comfortable life. If that's what you're doing, that's called neglect. And you are not teaching your child, you are not instructing your child, you are being a lazy parent. Take time to discipline your child, and don't do it in anger. If you're angry at a child that needs to be disciplined by either giving a timeout or, yes, I believe in spanking, inappropriate instances, and my appropriate instances are for two reasons. One, for the child's safety. If a child runs in the street, I'm going to spank the little behind and tell them not to do that ever again and get their attention. If they're sticking a knife in the light socket in the wall, I'm definitely going to spank the little behind because it could kill them. Okay, so that's one reason I spank. The other reason I spank is when that child looks at you, and this is Dr. Dobson's theory also, and that child looks at you and you've told them to do something to do, and they look at you with defiance and say, I'm not going to do what you said. Well, you need to get their attention and let them know that you're serious and that you're doing this for their own good. And I know that sounds very hollow to a child to be told that they're being spanked for their own good. But really, it's true, and I've heard many instances of children as adults going back to their parents and thanking their parents for taking the time to discipline them. And at this time, I'd like to take the time to thank my mother and father for taking me to the woodshed quite a few times during my childhood years. I don't think maybe they spanked me over, a dozen times, maybe even less. Maybe it was a handful. But they certainly got my attention, and I respected them. And when my mom told you to do something, we listened to her and we did what she said for the most part. So kudos to mom and dad out there if you're listening today. God bless you, and thank you for applying the rod of learning to the seed of education. Okay, getting back to this. Listen to this. As many as 2/3 of people in treatment for drug abuse reported being abused or neglected as children. Again, getting back to neglect. Neglect is one of the worst things. That's the biggest area of abuse is neglect. I mean, that is like the vast majority of abuse among children is this thing called neglect. And it's 78.3% of all child abuse. That's over 3/4 of all child abuse is neglect. And then more than 1/3 of adolescents with a report of abuse or neglect will have a substance use disorder before their 18th birthday, 3 times as likely as those without a report of abuse or neglect. Listen, if you're letting your kid run the streets day and night and you're not paying attention to what your child is doing, there's people out there on the streets that will pay attention to what your child is doing and will provide recreational activities for your child that they see fit, which is buying their cigarettes, buying their drugs, buying their values and lifestyle and gangbanging and all this other stuff. If you're not going to take the time to raise your children and you're going to sit at home, again, if you're a drunk and you're an alcoholic or you're a drug abuser and you have children, you need to get those children to a safe environment. And I'm talking to you. Yes, you. You need to do this. If you disagree with what I'm saying, please feel free to call me at 561-623-9429. Again, that number is 561-623-9429. Or you can contact me at Human Rights and Justice for All at gmail.com. Or you can give me a call on my phone after the show at 315-744-0007, and I would be glad to take your comments and your discussion. I've dealt with many, many difficult things that have come out of the show where people were either challenged or maybe even offended. And, I've always dealt with everyone in love. and I maintain that I will do that going forward. I do not think it's correct to become angry with people who disagree with you, even though that happens sometimes. I just don't think it's correct. I don't think it's professional, and I don't want to participate in it. So here's another little story from the Bible. Mark 10, verses 13 through 16. I think this is very interesting. People were bringing little children to Jesus to have him touch them, but the disciples rebuked them. When Jesus saw this, he was indignant. So he's seeing his disciples saying, hey, don't bring the kids to Jesus. Leave them alone. They're not important enough. And Jesus is like, he gets angry with them. And he says to them, let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, or don't stop them. For the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. I tell you the truth, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it. And he took the children in his arms and put his hands on them and blessed them. Now, if you're Jesus and you're taking children in your arm, that means you're picking them up. So some of these kids were little kids. I'm sure he wasn't hoisting, 12 and 13-year-olds up. He was hugging them and putting his hands on them. But some of these were little children. He loved children. And he said, not only that, but unless you receive the kingdom of God like a little child, just in simple faith, simple belief, simple trust, that you'll not enter it. So that's one of the really interesting thing that I'd like to point out. I want to go into a couple more verses, then I'm going to go into prevention of child abuse. So again, if you'd like to comment or call in, please call at 561-623-9429. Another verse here, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 7. Impress them on your children and talk to them when you sit at home. This is talking about the law of God, the Ten Commandments, which we were just learned was toppled in Washington, D.C. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. This is how to train your children. Tell them about your moral beliefs and your values. Tell them about your belief in freedom, in justice, and in human rights. Tell them what you believe with regard to the Ten Commandments, and that it's wrong to kill, that it's wrong to steal, that it's wrong to covet, that it's wrong to hate other people. Tell them these things, even as young children, and do it every time, every portion of the day. Again, don't overdo it. How many people have heard of a preachy father or preachy mother? But there are teachable moments when you can speak to a child and they will listen to you. So, one of the things that I'm really cognizant about with regard to this show is my audience is between 14 and 45 years old. And the reason I say that is because the computer-savvy persons, for the most part on these days, are between those ages of 14 and 45. Some are in the 50s, some are in the 60s. I've seen a lot of 50-year-olds that have pretty good computer skills, and that's because of work and whatnot. But the younger generation are raised with this stuff, so they know what it is. And that's why I choose the medium of radio to get my message out to people, is because radio is what young people are listening to online now, podcasts, things that they can listen to on demand, and things that they can listen even to live on the air, so they can call in and participate. So it's just something that's my demographic, and I thank you for listening, every one of you out there. I would like to hear from you, even if you just say hi. Just send me a note to say hi. Text me at 315-744-0007. I promise you I won't bug you. Just say hi. Just let me know you're out there. I want to get some feedback from the show, and I thank God for all the feedback I've received thus far. But I'd like to hear from other people out there. Please do that. My number is 315-744-0007, and you can contact me there. And here's another interesting verse, Mark chapter 9, verses 36 and 37. He said,